To Philippa Whitford.
Thank you very much, Sir David. Obviously, what we've been discussing is new Clause 3 and Amendment 7, which is about the process that is facing this place. And as has been said, is there any point in Clause 9 if there's going to be a withdrawal agreement bill? But the problem is if Clause 9 remains on the face of the bill, the government then still have powers in the interim to make changes, including to the bill itself, which means that when this bill would complete, the executive could simply change it in any way they wanted. The other issue is that in having a vote that is supposedly meaningful, if the only options we have is the deal that comes back or no deal, then frankly that is Hobson's choice. And what should have been happening is what the Prime Minister categorically refused, a running commentary. Other governments in Europe during negotiations have sent people back to the negotiating table to try to make changes when legislation has been enacted. And it's important that we remember the paucity of the debate running up to June 2016. We did not explore all the impacts. There was one debate in this chamber on the EU and the economy. With my background, there was no debate in this chamber regarding the health impacts, the social impacts, the loss of rights and opportunities. We didn't have that. We did not air these issues, and it's like we're actually having the Brexit debate now. I want to speak to Amendment 143, moved by the member for Brighton Pavilion, looking for a signed agreement to protect EU citizens in the UK and UK citizens in the EU.
Antoinette Samba.
I'm not capable of hearing what my honourable friend is saying, because there seems to be an inordinate racket behind me being made by one of my colleagues, and I wonder whether it would be in order, Mr Chairman, for you to make the point clear that this is an incredibly important debate and one in which members of Parliament should be able to hear about what is being said.
The honourable lady is entirely right. We should be courteous to each other. And while I'm on my feet, I did say at the start that with so many people wishing to speak, if they spoke for 7 or 8 minutes, everyone will be called. It's now really down to 3 or 4 minutes. So, Dr. Philippa Whitford.
Thank you, Sir David. I hope, as the frontbench representative here, and perhaps the only person who will get to speak, that that timing is not particularly applied to me.
Yes, absolutely, Philippa.
The other amendment that I wish to move is in my name and that of my colleagues, which is about Amendment 241, preserving reciprocal healthcare and social security rights under Regulations 883 from 2004 and 987 from 2009. And also to move Amendments 270 and 271 that are in the name of the member for the Ross, Skye and Lochaber, preventing either Clause 8 or Clause 9 being used by the executive to reduce the rights of EU citizens in this country. It is important that we recognise that there was supposedly a breakthrough last week, and that after Phase 1 agreement was achieved, some level of agreement was meant to be fixed. But unfortunately, what we saw on the Marr show was that being unpicked. We're still hearing the phrase, no deal is better than a bad deal. And that completely undermines the agreement made last week. So one of the pleas I would like to make is that, having reached a Phase 1 agreement on citizens' rights, it should now be taken out of negotiations, and a deal to give them security should be brought forward now in the immigration bill which is coming up, and not left another year to the withdrawal agreement bill. It's a year and a half. Now, many members here know that my husband is German. There are many people here with EU spouses. We have friends who have been in extreme anxiety and uncertainty for a year and a half. So this is not something that is going to happen in March 2019. It's something happening now. 10,000 EU nationals have left the 4 NHSs because their children are being bullied, they feel insecure, and they're going home to be, in inverted commas, safe. That is an appalling indictment on the situation we're in. I give way.
I'm very grateful to her for giving way, because she's making an incredibly strong point that gets lost in all of this debate about Article this and Article that, which is that these are people's real lives at stake. And does she share with me a real anger at the way in which the Brexit Secretary has been playing fast and loose with people's lives, with the way in which he went onto the MAR programme, completely ripped up the agreement that people thought they had on Friday, and which has a big impact on their lives.
I thank the Honourable Lady for that intervention, and it's absolutely right. I think of all the other things, we're talking about preparing for a future date, but the suffering and anxiety of EU nationals or EU national families in this country is already happening and has been going. They should have been given surety literally the morning after the vote. But we heard phrases like bargaining chips and playing cards, and that they were key in the negotiations.
I thank my honourable friend for giving way. And would she agree with me when we start looking at the academic sector and young early career researchers? They are highly mobile and can easily move elsewhere. We should be rolling out the red carpet to them to make sure they stay. And instead we're treating them worse than the piece of dirt on our shoes.
I absolutely agree. And as I say, we have lost 10,000 EU nationals from health services. And we have seen a greater than 90% drop in EU national nurses registering to come here. So it isn't just about protecting the people who are already here. For NHS services across the UK, workforce is one of their biggest issues. And yet we are sending out such an unwelcoming signal that we will be struggling to attract anyone else. I give way.
I thank the Honourable Lady for giving way. Would she also agree, though, at this point, whilst I agree with many of the points she's making, it's absolutely vital that we send the very clear reassurance that was given at the dispatch box by the Prime Minister to all our NHS and care staff that they and their families are welcome to stay, we want them to stay, and their rights are now guaranteed.
I absolutely agree with the Honourable Lady, but unfortunately coming to the dispatch box every couple of months with warm words of welcome to EU staff, when in between we've had women who have been raising their families here with a British partner or a partner of EU origin being turned down for permanent residency because they hadn't taken private comprehensive health insurance. We have had 100 EU nationals sent prepare to leave letters. Friends of ours who tried to get citizenship for their 3 children, born and grown up in Scotland, eldest and youngest given a passport, middle child refused. So I'm sorry, the experience of EU nationals on the ground for a year and a half has been horrendous. So if the Phase 1 agreement last week is to mean anything, we should be bringing that into the immigration bill and giving them certainty now, not telling them that they might have to wait another year before they actually find out what their future is going to be. Now, to exercise the right to live anywhere, the access to healthcare and social security is crucial to that. It has made such a difference, not just to EU nationals who come here, but our pensioners who have settled in the sunny uplands of the northern Mediterranean. What position will they be in if they cannot access healthcare? It must be recognised freedom of movement was not just a one-way street. Our young people, our professionals, were able to take advantage of that over the last 40 years. And it's something we're taking away from the next generation, which is something that I find terrible. Now, the government say, and it's in the Phase 1 agreement, that they accept keeping regulations 883 and 987. So let's bring that in. Let's get that down on paper and get it passed. Because saying to EU nationals, you can stay, you're welcome, but there might be no deal, which means you'll have no legal standing and you won't be able to use the NHS, is of no use to anyone. Now, the other thing, as well as rights and opportunities that the EU has brought us, is cooperation. And the agencies of which we are members is probably the prime example of that. Sadly, more than half of the EU agencies do not have a constitutional position for third countries, but 21 of them do allow participation, and 12 of those allow what's called cooperation, which doesn't involve payment in the way participation would. So it's important that the government utilise those, keep us in or as close to the agencies as possible, that we're bringing benefit to the UK. And it's important to recognise that this affects all constituent parts of the UK, all 4 nations, and these decisions cannot be made by delegated legislation down in an office with no discussion with this Parliament and no discussion with the devolved nations, who will have to mitigate and face the ramifications in their own countries. Now, with an airport and the northern air traffic control in my constituency, naturally I support amendments 245 and 246 of staying in the single European sky, which is the reform of airspace, the European Common Aviation Agreement, which is what allowed the budget airlines to literally take off and has allowed people to travel cheaply. But what is also important is the European Aviation Safety Agency, and that is a body of the EU and EFTA. And it's important to recognise there are things that we can be in, there's things we can't be in, and we lose these because we seem to have negotiated with ourselves to move to a hard Brexit instead of a soft Brexit. Everyone here is saying, oh yes, this was all aired during the debate. I remember hearing Leavers saying, of course we won't leave the single market. Don't be ridiculous. But yet that's the plan. That's where we're heading at the moment.
I'm grateful to my honourable learned friend. I wonder if they would agree with me in relation to the points in the amendments by the Right Honourable Leonard member for Beaconsfield, and also the Right Honourable member for Leeds Central, that without the transparency of knowing what we're progressing to, many of the items my honourable Leonard friend talk about can actually be agreed within the House, because we leave ourselves open to the accusation laid, I think most importantly by Cathy Sheridan in the Irish Times this morning, where we feel the government is failing to establish in advance of what the question should be asked, of utterly disdaining an alternative unifying vision while obsessing about trade, blue passports and colonial nostalgia.
Yes, colonial nostalgia.
Okay, I'm just going to move swiftly on. Now, it will be understandable. Well, it was a speech, so you've had your chance to get that in. Obviously, there are multiple agencies that are important for the nations across the UK, but my particular interest is, of course, in health. We know that the European Medicines Agency is moving to Amsterdam, but the much bigger issue is the UK coming out of the European Medicines Agency. This has massively reduced bureaucracy, this has streamlined the launch of new drugs, and has meant that pharmaceutical industries only have to go through one registration process for 500 million people. This is why drugs are launched in Europe at much the same time as America, and about a year before Canada and Australia. With some of what's going on in NHS England, including the budget impact assessment that can allow expensive drugs to be delayed for 3 years, what I'm hearing from pharmaceutical industry is that they actually see the UK as a hostile market, and they may not come 6 months later or a year later. It may take longer than that, because they only see the point in paying the extra cost to register when they have a chance of their drug being used in the NHS. Because...
Thank the Honourable Lady for giving way. She's making an important point, and is she not also mindful on the pharmaceuticals issue that even the issue of cross-border production, which many of our companies are involved in, including GSK in my constituency, currently has no certainty at a critically important time for the future of this industry?
I would agree with the honourable member, and things like the quality control and batch certification and lot release must be done within the EU, and we have several centres in Scotland and indeed across the UK which will have to move. I'm actually going to move on. There's a whole queue of people trying to get in. Now, the other things that the EMA does is lead on research, particularly for rare diseases and paediatric diseases, where it simply isn't possible to do that as a single country. And I also would support Amendment 351 in my name to seek that we remain participators in the new clinical trials regulation, which will come into effect in April. But crucial to that is that we maintain standards of data protection. If we rush into a situation of racing to the bottom, we will end up as pariahs in this situation, and we will simply not be able to cooperate with others. I support the amendment of the member for Wantage 300 regarding Euratom, but I would like to clear up one point, which was the issue of medical isotopes. This issue, access to a secure supply of medical radioisotopes, was raised by the Royal College of Radiologists and dismissed by the government because they are non-fissile. Absolutely they're non-fissile. But we had a catastrophic shortage from 2008 to 2010. And as a breast cancer surgeon, I couldn't do the bone scans I wanted. The new technique of sentinel node biopsy, which was being rolled out, had to be delayed and stalled. I would have to choose which of my patients might get access to the one dose of technetium that we had to do a bone scan. That's why the Euratom Supply Agency set up the European Observatory on Supply of Medical Isotopes, and they manage that. Now, we face real challenges in the coming years. These reactors that produce molybdenum, from which we get technetium, are not in the UK. We do not produce any of this stuff at all. And we do not yet have a replacement technique as these reactors go offline. So it's important that the government realise, if we are not part of the observatory, if we are not participators, then the Euratom Supply Agency has no obligation to us. They might help us, but we are going to be at the bottom of the queue, and that will affect patients. Finally, the new clause 44, in the name of my colleague from Edinburgh and South West, calls for an impact assessment on the impact of Brexit on health and social care, looking at workforce, particularly workforce of social care workers, where the percentage of EU nationals is even higher than in the NHS. They will not qualify for Tier 2 type visas. They are often not highly paid, and yet we utterly rely on them. It has still been ruled out that consideration would be given to staying in the single market and the customs union, and yet that would solve all of these problems, including the Irish border. So I would call on the government to consider stepping back from creating all of these difficulties and reconsider staying in the single market and in the customs union, because the EU isn't just about trade. It is about rights and opportunities and cooperation.
Ed Fee.